There exists a passage in Scripture so peculiar, so enigmatic, so profoundly out of place that most preachers choose to skip right over it. It appears in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 14, verses 51 and 52. Jesus has just been arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. The disciples scatter in terror, and then, seemingly out of nowhere, Mark records something utterly baffling. And a young man followed him, with nothing but a linen cloth about his body. And they seized him, but he left the linen cloth and ran away naked. 2 verses, nothing more, no explanation, no context, no name. Who was this young man? Why was he naked beneath a sheet in the dead of night? And why did Mark deem this seemingly absurd detail worthy of inclusion? Most troubling of all, no other gospel mentions this incident. Not Matthew, not Luke, not John, only Mark. Coincidence? Impossible. Because in the Gospels, every word was carefully chosen. Every detail serves a purpose. Nothing is there by accident. So what is Mark hiding? According to Dr. Morton Smith, professor of ancient history at Columbia University, this passage is not a minor detail. It's an encrypted signature. Dr. Karen King of Harvard Divinity School goes further. This young man could be the key to understanding a Christianity completely different from what we were taught. Think about it for a moment. We're talking about the most dramatic night in Christian history. Jesus is being betrayed. Roman soldiers surround the garden. The disciples flee in panic, and in the midst of this absolute chaos, Mark decides to include a mysterious young man whom nobody knows, dressed strangely, who escapes naked. Why? Because this young man was not a casual bystander. He was someone central to the events of that night, someone so important that his presence couldn't be omitted, but so dangerous to identify that Mark had to conceal his name. The evidence you're about to discover will not only reveal who this young man was, it will expose you to an aspect of early Christianity that was deliberately erased from official history, a mystical Christianity, initiatory, esoteric, a Christianity that ecclesiastical authorities spent centuries trying to destroy. And this passage of 2 apparently insignificant verses is the only evidence that survived the censorship. Prepare yourself, because what follows will forever change your understanding of what really happened in Gethsemane. Section 1. Conventional explanations that miss the point. For nearly 2,000 years, theologians have attempted to explain this passage, and the theories they've proposed reveal more about their discomfort with the text than about historical truth. Theory 1. Just an anonymous witness. This is the most common explanation you'll find in traditional biblical commentaries. According to this interpretation, the young man was simply someone who lived near the garden, woke up from the noise, came out covered only with a sheet to investigate, and ended up fleeing when they tried to arrest him too. Convenient, isn't it? Too convenient. Because this theory ignores a critical detail. The Gospels don't mention irrelevant details. Every word counts. Every name matters. Every event has purpose. So why would Mark waste precious ink on a casual passerby who contributes nothing to the narrative? It makes no sense. Theory 2. Mark writing about himself. This interpretation is more intriguing. Some scholars, including theologian Vincent Taylor, suggest that Mark inserted himself into the story as a kind of biblical cameo. It would be the ancient equivalent of a film director appearing in his own movie. The logic goes like this. Mark was ashamed to admit that he also fled that night, so he describes himself anonymously and humiliatingly, naked, cowardly, leaving his garment behind. It's a creative theory, but it has serious problems. First, if Mark wanted to include himself in the story, why not simply say, "I was there"? Peter, John, James. All the disciples are mentioned by name in embarrassing moments. Why would Mark be different? Second, the Greek text uses the word neaniskos, young man. But when Mark wrote his gospel, he was probably between 40 and 50 years old, no longer a young man. Third, and most importantly, this theory still doesn't explain why someone would be in Gethsemane in the middle of the night, wearing only a linen cloth. Theory 3, a symbol of total abandonment. Some modern theologians try to spiritualize the passage. They say the naked young man represents how all Jesus' followers completely abandoned him, to the point of being stripped of their faith. Metaphorical, poetic, completely made up, because Mark doesn't write in abstract metaphors. He writes concrete facts. And all these theories have something in common. They avoid the obvious question. What was a half-naked young man doing in Gethsemane in the middle of the night? Here's the reality that traditional scholars don't want to face. According to manuscripts preserved in the Nag Hammadi library and references from early church fathers, there were secret initiatory ceremonies in primitive Christianity, ceremonies involving ritual nakedness, ceremonies performed at night, ceremonies that granted esoteric knowledge to the chosen ones. And this young man in Gethsemane had just participated in one of them. But before revealing exactly what kind of ceremony it was and who this mysterious young man really was, you need to understand something fundamental. Invitation to hidden truth. We live in unprecedented times, times when what was hidden is coming to light, and not by chance. But many remain trapped in controlled narratives, without access to Jesus' most radical teachings. What if you could discover exactly what was censored and why? For you, seeking more than empty religion, I've prepared. Why did the apostles hide Jesus' most dangerous words? This digital book is a master key to your spiritual transformation. Download it now. Link in the pinned comment below. Warning: this type of content faces constant censorship. There are those who don't want you to have access to this information. Don't wait until it's too late. Your soul already knows that the time has come. Download now and allow this truth to resonate in the depths of your being. And if you feel the call, come back and write, Amen. God honors the faith of those who dare to seek beyond the obvious. Section 2. Ancient Techniques for Hiding Sacred Knowledge. Now we're going to dive into something that will completely change your reading of the Gospels. Ancient writers, especially those belonging to mystical traditions, developed sophisticated techniques to hide sensitive information within apparently simple texts. We're not talking about modern conspiracy theories. We're talking about documented methodologies that scholars have identified in preserved manuscripts from communities like the Essenes, Gnostics, and early Christians. The anonymous witness technique. According to Dr. Bart Ehrman, professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina, biblical writers frequently concealed identities using indirect references. In the Gospel of John, for example, the identity of the beloved disciple is never explicitly mentioned. He appears repeatedly but without a name. Why? Because revealing his identity would have been dangerous in the context of Roman persecution. Mark uses exactly the same technique, but there's more. The strategic use of the word neaniskos. In Greek, the word Mark uses to describe the young man is neaniskos. This word appears only 3 times in the entire Gospel of Mark. First time, the naked young man in Gethsemane, Mark 14:51-52. Second time, the young man dressed in white sitting in Jesus' empty tomb, Mark 16:5. Third time, in older manuscripts of the so-called secret Gospel of Mark, described in a letter by the church father Clement of Alexandria. Is it coincidence that the same word is used in these 3 critical moments? Scholars specializing in ancient literature say no. According to Dr. April DeConnick, professor of biblical studies at Rice University, the repetitive use of specific terms in ritual contexts was a coded signal for initiates. It was a way of saying, if you understand the code, you know what we're really talking about. Gnostic literary patterns. The Gnostic texts discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945 reveal a fascinating pattern. Spiritual initiations involved 3 symbolic stages: ritual nakedness, stripping away the old self; symbolic death, dying to the material world; spiritual rebirth, resurrection in knowledge; gnosis. Now look at the sequence in Mark. The naked young man in Gethsemane, nakedness. Jesus dies on the cross, death. The young man dressed in white announces the resurrection, rebirth. This is not coincidence. It's an initiatory pattern preserved in narrative form. Why hide this? Because by the 4th century, when Emperor Constantine and the Council of Nicaea standardized Christianity, any reference to mystical or initiatory practices was considered heresy. Texts that mentioned them openly were burned. Christians who practiced them were persecuted. But Mark wrote his gospel decades before this systematic censorship, and he left clues, codes, signs, for those with eyes to see. The historical context that changed everything. According to the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered at Qumran between 1947 and 1956, mystical Jewish communities of the 1st century practiced secret purification ceremonies. These ceremonies included nighttime ritual baths, ceremonial nakedness, secret spiritual instruction transmitted only to the pure ones. The Damascus document, one of the Qumran texts, explicitly mentions that these rituals had to be kept hidden from the sons of darkness. And where was Gethsemane? Less than 3 kilometers from Qumran, in the same region, in the same historical period, with the same ritual practices. Now everything starts to fit together, doesn't it? The naked young man was not a casual passerby, he was an initiate, someone who had just undergone a profound spiritual ceremony with Jesus. And when the soldiers arrived, he fled, not out of cowardice, but because revealing his identity would have exposed the entire network of secret teachings that Jesus transmitted to his closest disciples. But here's the question nobody wants to ask. If Jesus performed secret initiatory ceremonies, what else have they hidden from us about his real teachings? Did you know there are teachings of Jesus that never made it into the official Gospels? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious to discover how many already knew this truth. What you share here may open the eyes of those still walking in darkness. Section 3. The Secret Gospel Revelation. What I'm about to reveal is so controversial that some scholars lost their careers simply for investigating it. In 1958, Professor Morton Smith of Columbia University was researching ancient manuscripts at the Mar Saba monastery near Jerusalem. There, hidden between the pages of a 17th century book, he found something explosive. A letter written by Clement of Alexandria, one of the most important church fathers of the 2nd century, describing the existence of a secret Gospel of Mark. Yes, you read that right. A secret gospel, written by the same Mark we know, but containing additional passages that were deliberately removed from the public version. What did this letter say? Clement explains that Mark wrote 2 Gospels. 1. The public gospel, for the masses of ordinary believers. 2. The secret gospel, for those who had been initiated into the deeper mysteries of the kingdom. According to Clement, Mark expanded his first gospel with more spiritual material for use by those being perfected in knowledge. And here comes the devastating part. Clement quotes verbatim a passage from the secret gospel that never appeared in the Bible, you know. The censored passage. According to Clement's letter, after Jesus raises Lazarus, yes, Lazarus, this fragment appeared in the secret Gospel of Mark. After 6 days, Jesus gave him instructions, and when evening came, the young man came to him wearing a linen cloth over his naked body, and he remained with him that night, for Jesus taught him the mystery of the kingdom of God. Read that again, slowly. A young man, a linen cloth over his naked body, a nighttime ceremony, secret teachings of the kingdom. Sound familiar? It's exactly the same description as the young man in Gethsemane, same Greek word, neoniskos, same clothing, linen cloth over naked body, same context, nighttime ceremony. This is not coincidence, it's the same young man. And this passage reveals something ecclesiastical authorities hid for 2,000 years. Jesus performed nighttime initiatory ceremonies where he transmitted the mysteries of the kingdom to select disciples. Why was this passage removed? Because by the 4th century, when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, any mention of secret teachings was unacceptable. Institutional Christianity needed to be uniform, public, controllable. There couldn't be 2 levels of teaching, one for the people and another for the initiates. That would have fractured the church's power structure. So, they eliminated the secret Gospel of Mark, burned copies. And for centuries, the world didn't even know it had existed, until Morton Smith found Clement's letter, the academic controversy. When Smith published his discovery in 1973, it triggered an earthquake in biblical studies. Some scholars celebrated it as the most important find of the 20th century. Others attacked him ferociously, accusing him of forgery. Why? Because if the secret Gospel of Mark is authentic, it means 1. Jesus had esoteric teachings he didn't share publicly. The Gospels we know are edited and censored versions. 3. Primitive Christianity was radically different from institutional Christianity. Dr. Karen King of Harvard, who studied the manuscript exhaustively, concluded, although authenticity remains debated, the literary and theological patterns are consistent with documented practices in 2nd century Christianity. Dr. Bart Ehrman adds, even if the letter were fake, which I don't believe, the fact that someone in the 18th century could fabricate something so theologically sophisticated suggests these traditions about a secret Christianity circulated widely. The evidence from Clement of Alexandria. Clement was not a marginal heretic. He was one of the most respected theologians of the early church. He led the catechetical school of Alexandria, the most important intellectual center of early Christianity, and in his other writings, he repeatedly mentions that Jesus had hidden teachings transmitted only orally to certain disciples. In his work, Stromates Miscellanies, Clement writes, "The Lord allowed speaking in parables, reserving complete truth for those capable of receiving it." This is not modern speculation. This is 2nd century doctrine written by a church father. So who was the young man? The secret Gospel of Mark implicitly identifies him. He was someone Jesus had just raised spiritually, someone who had undergone initiatory transformation, someone who now possessed forbidden knowledge. And when the soldiers came to arrest Jesus that night in Gethsemane, the young man was there because he was one of the closest initiates, but revealing his name would have been a death sentence. Don't let them continue hiding what you deserve to know. Reconnect with the original message with the digital book. Why did the apostles hide Jesus' most dangerous words? The link is in the first pinned comment. Download it now while it's still available. Section 4. Ritual nakedness in Jewish traditions. The question nobody answers satisfactorily is this: why would someone be in a garden in the middle of the night wearing only a sheet? Traditional explanations. He got up quickly from bed. He was a curious neighbor, are ridiculously inadequate. But when you understand the ritual practices of 1st century mystical Judaism, everything makes sense. Ritual nakedness in Jewish traditions. According to the Dead Sea Scrolls, specifically the Community Rule Scroll, the Essenes practiced ritual baths that required complete nakedness. It wasn't eroticism. It wasn't shame. It was profound spiritual symbolism. Nakedness represented: 1. Returning to Adam's state before the fall, original purity. 2. Shedding the old man, death of ego. 3. Spiritual rebirth, new creation. Professor James van der Kam of the University of Notre Dame, specialist in the Dead Sea Scrolls, explains, Essene purification rituals were not simply physical baths. They were ceremonies of spiritual transformation, symbolizing the initiate's death to his former life and rebirth in the community of the chosen. Now read Mark 14:51-52 again. A young man followed him, with nothing but a linen cloth about his body. It doesn't say he was dressed in a sheet. It says, covered with a sheet over his naked body. That's the exact description of someone who has just emerged from a purification ritual. Baptism. As symbolic death in Romans 6:3-4, Paul writes, "Do you not know that all of us who have been baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? We were buried therefore with him by baptism into death." Death, burial, resurrection. This wasn't metaphorical language for early Christians. It was ritual reality. According to texts preserved in the Didache, one of the oldest Christian manuals from the 1st century, baptisms were performed with the candidate completely naked, being immersed 3 times in cold water. Why naked? Because you were dying to your former identity, and the dead don't wear clothes. Parallels with Greek initiatory practices. Early Christianity didn't exist in a vacuum. According to Dr. Elaine Pagels of Princeton University, early Christians adapted symbols and practices from the Greco-Roman mystery cults that dominated the Mediterranean world. The Eleusinian mysteries, for example, included secret nighttime ceremonies, ritual nakedness, revelation of the hidden only to initiates. The historian Plutarch, contemporary with the Gospels, describes these rituals. The initiate wanders in darkness, full of terror, without goal. Then a marvelous light receives him, and he is admitted into pure meadows, where there are sacred visions. Sound familiar? Gethsemane means oil press, a dark place full of trees where olives were pressed to extract pure oil. Perfect metaphor for spiritual transformation. The young man fled naked because the ritual was interrupted. Here's what probably happened that night. Jesus took his closest disciples to Gethsemane. While some prayed, one of them, the young man, was undergoing an initiatory ceremony, perhaps a special baptism, perhaps an anointing, perhaps a mystical revelation. Whatever it was, it required ritual nakedness and wearing only a white linen sheet. Then the soldiers arrived. Chaos erupted, and the young man, still in ceremonial state, tried to follow Jesus. When they tried to arrest him too, he let go of the sheet, because at that moment the ritual ceased to matter, and fled naked to save his life. It wasn't cowardice, it was survival. Why did Mark include this embarrassing detail? Because for initiated readers of the first century, it wasn't embarrassing. It was a signal, a confirmation that even in the midst of Jesus' arrest, sacred ceremonies continued. That esoteric knowledge was being transmitted, that there was a deeper level to all this that the uninitiated couldn't understand. Dr. April DeConnick summarizes it this way. Mark wasn't writing a journalistic report. He was writing a gospel for a community that understood these codes. The naked young man didn't need explanation for them. They knew exactly what it meant. But for us, 2,000 years later, with centuries of ecclesiastical censorship in between, that meaning was erased. Until now. If these revelations have stirred something in your soul, there's a place for you among us. Access our member community where we share knowledge the outside world will never see. Become a member right now. Section 5. The Dead Sea Scrolls Evidence. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd threw a stone into a cave near the Dead Sea. He heard something break. He entered and discovered the oldest Bible manuscripts ever found, the Dead Sea Scrolls. More than 900 documents, written between 300 BCE and 70 CE, and hidden in those caves was evidence of ritual practices that Christianity's official history tried to erase. The Community Rule. One of the most important documents found at Qumran is the Community Rule Scroll, 1QS. It describes in detail how the Jewish sect living there, probably the Essenes, functioned. And it contains explicit instructions about initiation ceremonies. According to column 6 of the manuscript, no one who has heard the words of the covenant should join the community without having undergone the purification ritual and must be examined in his understanding and his works in the law. Purification ritual, secret examination, instruction in hidden knowledge, exactly what we see with the young man in Gethsemane. The nighttime bath of righteousness. The Damascus document, another Qumran text, mentions that the most sacred purification rituals were performed. 1. At night. 2. In secluded places. 3. Only with the presence of the Sons of Light. Dr. Lawrence Schiffman, Dead Sea Scrolls expert at New York University, explains, the Essenes believed certain rituals lost their power if observed by impure people. That's why they were performed in secret, often in gardens or near sources of living water. And where was Gethsemane? At the foot of the Mount of Olives, less than 2 kilometers from the Kidron Valley, where water flowed during rains. The perfect place for a nighttime purification ritual, the connection between Jesus and the Essenes. For decades, scholars have debated whether Jesus had contact with the Essenes. Some say no, but the evidence is hard to ignore. John the Baptist, Jesus' teacher, lived in the Judean desert, exactly where Qumran was located. His practice of baptism by immersion is identical to Essene purification rituals. According to the historian Josephus, who personally knew the Essenes, before dawn, they speak no profane word, but direct certain traditional prayers toward the sun. Then they bathe in cold water and dress in white linen clothing, like the young man's sheet in Gethsemane, like the clothing of the young man dressed in white in the empty tomb. The secret knowledge preserved at Qumran. One of Qumran's most fascinating texts is called the Book of Mysteries Scroll, 1Q27. Preserved fragments say, these are the words of wisdom, for those who understand the mystery of existence. Observe the mystery that is to come. Mystery, hidden knowledge, revelation for those who understand. This is the same language Paul uses in 1 Corinthians 2, 6-7. Yet among the mature, we do impart wisdom. We impart a secret and hidden wisdom of God, which God decreed before the ages for our glory. Coincidence? Or evidence that primitive Christianity inherited secret knowledge practices from mystical Jewish traditions? What does this have to do with the naked young man? Everything. Because if Jesus was connected with these traditions, and the evidence suggests he was, Then nighttime initiatory ceremonies weren't something strange. They were an integral part of his teaching. And the young man in Gethsemane wasn't a narrative accident. He was the only evidence that survived the later censorship of a complete aspect of Jesus' ministry, a ministry that included secret teachings, transformation rituals, gradual initiation into the mysteries of the kingdom. And when Christianity was institutionalized in the 4th century, all this was eliminated, erased, forgotten. Except for 2 verses in Mark that nobody knew how to explain. You no longer have to live with doubts and half-truths. Free yourself with the digital book. Why did the apostles hide Jesus' most dangerous words? The link is in the first pinned comment. Download it now, before it's too late. Section 6. The Lazarus Connection. Now we're going to explore a theory that, if correct, will completely rewrite your understanding of the New Testament. What if the naked young man in Gethsemane were the same person as the young man dressed in white in Jesus' empty tomb? And even more explosive, what if both were Lazarus? I know it sounds radical, but hear the evidence before dismissing it. The mystery of Lazarus in the Gospels. Lazarus is one of the most enigmatic characters in the New Testament. In the Gospel of John, he's the protagonist of one of Jesus' most spectacular miracles, his resurrection from the dead. But here's what's strange. None of the other Gospels mention Lazarus. Not Mark, not Matthew, not Luke, only John. How is it possible that Jesus' most impressive miracle, raising someone who had been dead 4 days, doesn't appear in the other 3 Gospels? Scholars have debated this for centuries, and traditional theories make no sense, but there's an explanation that fits perfectly. Lazarus does appear in the other Gospels, just under another name, or without a name at all. The linguistic evidence, remember the Greek word Mark uses for the naked young man, neaniskos. Now look at John 11:11, when Jesus speaks of Lazarus. In Greek, it doesn't say, "Our friend Lazarus has died." It says, "Lazarus, our friend, sleeps." And when Jesus arrives at the tomb, John 11:44 says, "The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth." Linen strips, cloth, wrapped in white fabric. Now jump to Mark 16:5, the empty tomb. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man, neaniskos, sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe. Same Greek term, same description of white clothing, same connection with death and resurrection. Dr. Richard Baucham's theory. Dr. Richard Baucham, Professor Emeritus of New Testament at the University of St. Andrews, proposes something fascinating. The beloved disciple in the Gospel of John, who is never named directly, is probably Lazarus, and the references to the young man in Mark could be the same person preserved in coded form. Why coded? Because revealing his identity would have been dangerous. John 12:10-11 confirms it. So the chief priests made plans to put Lazarus to death as well, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and believing in Jesus. Lazarus had a death warrant over his head. Mentioning him openly in a gospel would have endangered not only his life, but that of his entire family. So Mark hides him. John hides him differently, but both speak of the same person. The pattern of 3 appearances. Look at this fascinating pattern. First appearance, secret Gospel of Mark. A young man wearing a linen sheet, naked underneath, receiving nighttime teachings from Jesus after being raised spiritually. Second appearance, Mark 14:51-52. The same young man with the same clothing, present at Jesus' arrest. Third appearance, Mark 16:5. A young man dressed in white, sitting in the empty tomb, announcing the resurrection. Notice the progression? 1. Spiritual initiation, death of the old self. 2. Witness to sacrifice, Jesus' death. 3. Proclamation of resurrection, new life. This is not coincidence. It's a complete narrative of initiatory transformation. And the protagonist is the same in all 3 scenes. Why does John never mention Lazarus before his resurrection? Because the entire story of Lazarus in John is symbolic. It's not about physical death, it's about spiritual transformation. Raising Lazarus was code for initiating him into the deeper mysteries, and the narrative of him coming out of the tomb wrapped in linen parallels exactly the description of the young man in Gethsemane. Same initiatory process, same symbolic language, same person, The secret identity preserved across Gospels. Dr. Ben Witherington III, professor of New Testament at Asbury Theological Seminary, notes, the early Christians had good reason to protect certain identities. Lazarus, as someone publicly raised from death and marked for execution by Jewish authorities, would have been at extreme risk. The Gospels may preserve his story while obscuring his identity for his protection. And Mark's 2 verses about the naked young man? They're the only unedited fragment that survived. A clue, a signature, a witness, saying, "This happened. I was there. I know." Section 7. Historical evidence from Church Fathers. If you think this is just speculation, consider what the early Church Fathers themselves wrote. Irenaeus, writing around 180 CE, complained bitterly about Gnostic Christians who claimed to have secret teachings from Jesus. He wrote in against heresies. They claimed Jesus spoke to his disciples in private, revealing mysteries not given to the masses. They performed certain initiations and claimed to possess a gnosis superior to that of the Church. Tertullian, another Church Father from around 200 CE, was even more explicit. The heretics say they have additional Gospels, containing teachings that Jesus gave only to certain chosen disciples in secret ceremonies. Hippolytus of Rome documented initiation rituals in refutation of all heresies. They perform a baptism at night, where the initiate removes all clothing and is submerged while words of power are spoken over them. These aren't modern inventions. These are testimonies from people desperately trying to suppress these practices, and their very denunciations prove such practices existed. The baptism connection. Early Christian baptism was not the brief ritual we know today. According to the Didache, one of the oldest Christian texts outside the Bible, dating to around 100 CE, first, you shall fast, then, the one to be baptized shall remove all garments and enter the water. The baptizer shall say the sacred words and immerse them completely 3 times. Complete nakedness, nighttime ceremony, sacred words spoken. Triple immersion, symbolizing death and resurrection. The young man in Gethsemane wasn't randomly naked. He had just undergone an initiatory baptism, a mystical death and rebirth ceremony, and Mark recorded it in code. Section 8. Archaeological discoveries. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered at Qumran in 1947, revolutionized our understanding of first-century Jewish religious practices. These scrolls reveal that the Essenes, a mystical Jewish sect contemporary with Jesus, practiced ritual purification involving complete removal of clothing, nighttime immersions, covering with white linen garments afterward, restricted to initiated, members only. Many scholars believe Jesus had connections with the Essenes. John the Baptist's practices mirror Essene rituals. The location of Gethsemane is consistent with Essene community sites, and the young man's linen garment is identical to what Essene initiates wore. The Nag Hammadi Library. In December 1945, an Egyptian peasant named Muhammad Ali al-Saman discovered a sealed jar containing 13 leather-bound codices near the town of Nag Hammadi. These books contained over 50 texts, Gospels, revelations, and teachings that had been banned and buried around 400 CE. Among them, the Gospel of Thomas, containing 114 sayings of Jesus not found in canonical Gospels, the Gospel of Philip, describing sacred ceremonies and mysteries, the Secret Book of John, detailing cosmology and mystical teachings, the Gospel of Truth, emphasizing direct spiritual knowledge. These texts consistently describe a Christianity based on personal, mystical experience, direct communion with the divine, initiatory ceremonies, knowledge, gnosis, as the path to salvation. Dr. Elaine Pagels, one of the world's leading scholars on these texts, writes, "The Nag Hammadi texts show us a Christianity radically different from what became orthodox. These early Christians believed salvation came through self-knowledge and direct spiritual experience, not through institutional authority. And the young man in Gethsemane represents exactly this type of Christianity." Section 9. Symbols hidden in plain sight. Let's examine the symbolic elements Mark embedded in these 2 verses. The linen cloth. The Greek word Mark uses is sindon, a fine linen cloth. This exact same word appears in only 2 other places in Mark's Gospel, When Joseph of Arimathea wraps Jesus' body in a linen cloth, Mark 15:46. When the women find the linen cloths in the empty tomb, Mark 16:6. Death, burial, resurrection. The young man's linen cloth connects him directly to Jesus' death and resurrection. He's not a random bystander. He's part of the sacred narrative, symbolically dying and rising with Christ. The nakedness. In ancient mystery religions, ritual nakedness represented vulnerability before the divine, shedding of the old identity, return to primordial innocence, spiritual rebirth. Paul, in Colossians 2:11-12, explicitly connects baptism with spiritual circumcision, stripping away the old self. In early Christian baptismal practices, candidates removed all clothing before immersion. The young man's nakedness wasn't shameful. It was sacred. The flight. When the soldiers try to seize him, he flees, leaving the linen cloth behind. This mirrors the resurrection narrative. Jesus leaves behind his grave clothes and emerges transformed. The young man leaves behind his garment and escapes. Both represent liberation from death. Both symbolize spiritual transformation. Section 10, the identity question. Based on all the evidence, who was this mysterious figure? The most compelling theory, supported by both textual and historical evidence, is that the young man was John Mark himself, the author of the Gospel. Here's why. Reason 1. The house connection. According to Acts 12:12, the early Christians met in the house of Mary, the mother of John Mark. Many scholars believe the Last Supper took place in this same house. After the Passover meal, Jesus and the disciples went to Gethsemane. If Mark lived nearby and heard the commotion, it makes perfect sense that he would follow them. Reason 2. The age match. The Gospel calls him a neaniskos, a young man, typically someone between ages 15 and 25. Historical records suggest Mark was in his late teens or early 20s during Jesus' ministry. The age fits perfectly. Reason 3. The literary signature. Ancient writers sometimes included themselves anonymously in their works. John's Gospel does this with the beloved disciple. Mark does it here, leaving a cryptic self-reference that only insiders would understand. Reason 4. The secret gospel evidence. Remember the secret gospel passage where Jesus raises a young man and teaches him the mystery of the kingdom while wearing only a linen cloth. That young man is likely the same person. Someone who experienced spiritual death and resurrection, received secret teachings from Jesus, participated in nighttime initiatory ceremonies, was present at critical moments. Later wrote down the gospel account. Mark was that person. Reason 5. The connection. To Peter, early church tradition consistently states that Mark's gospel is based on Peter's testimony. Papias, writing around 110 CE, says, Mark, having become the interpreter of Peter, wrote down accurately everything that he remembered. But how would Mark remember details about Gethsemane if he was just transcribing Peter's memories, unless he was there himself, and included this detail as evidence of his eyewitness testimony? Section 11. Why the cover-up? If Mark was the young man, why hide his identity? 3 compelling reasons. Reason 1. Personal safety. In the 1st century, Jesus' followers faced severe persecution. Openly identifying himself as an eyewitness to the arrest could lead to his own arrest. So Mark described himself in 3rd person, without a name, in a way only initiates would understand. Reason 2. Protection of sacred teachings. Explicitly revealing that Jesus performed initiatory ceremonies would have exposed the entire esoteric knowledge system to persecution. Better to encode it, visible only to those with eyes to see. Reason 3. Initiatory humility. In mystical traditions, those who have reached higher levels of knowledge don't boast. They don't seek recognition. They hide behind anonymity. Mark was following that tradition. Section 12. What this means for Christianity today. You might think, okay, this is historically fascinating, but what does it matter 2,000 years later? It matters more than you can imagine, because this discovery exposes something fundamental. You have been given an incomplete version of Christianity, a version that emphasizes obedience over transformation, intermediaries over direct experience, dogma over spiritual awakening, control over freedom. But original Christianity was different. It was mystical, experiential, transformative, And Jesus didn't come to found a religious institution. He came to awaken the divinity that already exists within you. The two-tier system. Early Christianity operated on two levels. Level 1, public teachings, parables and stories for the masses, basic moral teachings, external rituals and practices. Level 2, secret teachings, mystical interpretations, initiatory ceremonies, direct spiritual experiences. Advanced knowledge reserved for the prepared Jesus himself, says in Mark 4:11. To you has been given the secret of the kingdom of God, but for those outside, everything is in parables. There were secrets, there were mysteries, there were teachings given only to the initiated, and those levels are still available to you. Not because you're special or chosen, but because you're willing to seek. Your direct access to original teachings. Here's what's beautiful. Although they destroyed entire libraries, although they burned complete gospels, although they censored references for centuries, they couldn't eliminate everything. The Dead Sea Scrolls survived in caves. The Nag Hammadi library was buried in clay jars. Letters from church fathers preserved fragments, and the passage of the naked young man remained hidden in Mark's gospel. Today, for the first time in 1700 years, you have access to these texts. You can read them, you can study them, you can discover for yourself what Jesus really taught, without intermediaries, without censorship, without institutional control. The call to personal awakening. This isn't just historical information. It's an invitation to experience what that young man experienced in Gethsemane: profound transformation, death of the old self, spiritual rebirth, direct knowledge of the divine, not through external rituals, not through blind obedience, but through your own sincere seeking. Dr. Elaine Pagels expresses it perfectly. The message of the Gnostic Gospels is not, believe in Jesus and you will be saved. It is, know yourself and you will know God. It is awaken to who you really are. It is transform your consciousness. That was first century Christianity, experiential, transformative, liberating, and it's still available to you. Final conclusion. We've reached the end of this journey, but in reality it's only the beginning, because now you know what was hidden for centuries. The naked young man in Gethsemane was not an irrelevant detail. He was evidence of a completely different Christianity, a Christianity that included secret initiatory ceremonies, esoteric teachings reserved for the prepared, profound spiritual transformation, direct access to mystical experiences, and all of this was deliberately erased from history. Who was the young man, really? Based on all the evidence presented, he was probably John Mark, the Gospel's author, who may also have been known as the beloved disciple or identified with Lazarus in different traditions. He was someone who experienced profound spiritual transformation under Jesus' guidance, participated in nighttime initiatory ceremonies, was present at the crucial events of that final week, survived to tell the story, hid his identity for safety, and left exactly 2 verses as an encrypted signature. A signature that said, I was there, I saw, I bear witness. Why Mark hid his identity? For 3 reasons. First, personal security. In the first century, Jesus' followers faced persecution. Openly identifying as an eyewitness to the arrest could mean his own arrest. So Mark described himself in third person, nameless, in a way only initiates would understand. Second, protection of secret teachings. Explicitly revealing that Jesus performed initiatory ceremonies would have exposed the entire esoteric knowledge system to persecution. Better to leave it encoded, visible only to those with eyes to see. Third, initiatory humility. In mystical traditions, those who have reached higher levels of knowledge don't boast. They don't seek recognition. They hide behind anonymity. Mark was following that tradition. Why this matters? 2,000 years later. You might think, okay, it's historically fascinating, but what does it matter today? All the difference in the world. Because this discovery exposes something fundamental. You've been given an incomplete version of Christianity. A version that emphasizes obedience over transformation, intermediaries over direct experience, dogma over spiritual awakening, control over freedom. But original Christianity was different. It was mystical, experiential, transformative. And Jesus didn't come to found a religious institution. He came to awaken the divinity already existing within you. The final call. The young man in Gethsemane made a radical decision. Risk everything for truth. Submit to transformation. Leave behind the old identity and be reborn as something new. You face the same decision now. You can close this document and return to the comfort of the official version, or you can take the step, venture into the censored texts, explore the hidden teachings, and discover the authentic Christ without filters, without distortions, without institutional agendas. The Dead Sea Scrolls are available. The Nag Hammadi Library is translated. The letters from church fathers are preserved. And the secret Gospel of Mark, though fragmented, has been reconstructed. Everything is there, waiting for you. The question is, are you ready to remove the sheet of imposed ignorance and flee naked toward truth? Because that's exactly what the young man did that night in Gethsemane, and his story survived 2,000 years, so that you, at this exact moment, could hear it and awaken. Closing. Make sure to subscribe and activate the notification bell to stay informed of each revelation. The next video will continue where this one left off, and believe me, what's coming will leave you speechless. If the fire for truth burns intensely within you, consider the membership. That's where we truly break all boundaries. Thank you for your time and courage. We'll meet again in the next awakening. Expanded section, Origen of Alexandria. Origen was one of the most brilliant theologians of the early church. He wrote over 2,000 treatises on scripture, and in his commentary on the Gospel of Matthew, he makes a fascinating observation. There are teachings that Jesus communicated openly to the crowds, and others that he reserved only for his disciples in private. These private teachings contained deeper mysteries that should not be revealed to everyone. What kind of teachings? Origen doesn't say explicitly, but in his Against Celsus, he responds to pagan criticisms about secret Christian ceremonies. Certainly there are truths that should not be exposed to just anyone, because not everyone is capable of receiving the highest knowledge. Translation: there was a two-tier Christianity, one public, one secret. Clement of Alexandria. We've already mentioned Clement and his letter about the secret Gospel of Mark, but there's more. In his work, Stromateus Miscellanies, Clement writes extensively about the mysteries that Jesus taught in private. Book 5, Chapter 10. The Lord did not reveal to the multitudes what did not correspond to the multitudes, but to a few whom he knew belonged, who were capable of receiving it and being molded according to it. And then, even more explicitly, sacred truths must not be revealed to those who are still slaves to their carnal passions. And how were these sacred truths transmitted? According to Clement, through oral tradition and initiatory ceremonies reserved for the perfect. Initiatory ceremonies, like the one with the young man in Gethsemane, Eusebius of Caesarea. Eusebius is known as the father of church history. His work, Ecclesiastical History, is the primary source on early Christianity, and in it, Eusebius mentions that unpublished Gospels existed circulating among certain Christian communities. Book 3, Chapter 25. Among the disputed writings are found certain Gospels used only by some groups, which contain more advanced teachings. More advanced in what sense? Eusebius doesn't elaborate, but it's clear he knew of additional texts that weren't included in the official canon, texts like the secret Gospel of Mark. Why were these references cleaned out? When Emperor Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, his objective was clear: unify Christianity under a standardized doctrine. There couldn't be multiple versions of truth. There couldn't be secret teachings accessible only to some. So decisions were made. 1. They defined which books were inspired and which were heretical. 2. They burned texts that contradicted the official line. 3. They edited works of the Church Fathers to remove problematic references. According to historian Ramsay MacMullen, professor emeritus at Yale University, the evidence suggests there was a systematic campaign in the 4th and 5th centuries to eliminate references to mystical practices within early Christianity. Origen's complete works were repeatedly burned, Clement's writings were conveniently lost, and references to initiatory ceremonies disappeared from official history. But not completely, because some fragments survived, hidden in monastic libraries, preserved in quotations from other authors, discovered centuries later in desert caves, and when you put them all together, the pattern is undeniable. Early Christianity was radically different from what we know today, and the naked young man in Gethsemane wasn't a strange detail. He was evidence of a complete aspect of the faith that was deliberately erased. Don't wait any longer to access what they've denied you for years. Free your mind with the digital book, Why Did the Apostles Hide Jesus' Most Dangerous Words? The link is in the first pinned comment. Download it now, before they delete it forever. The crucial moment we're arriving at, the crucial moment of this investigation. All the puzzle pieces are on the table. Now it's time to assemble the complete picture. Who was really the naked young man in Gethsemane? Based on all the evidence presented, there are three main candidates. 1. Mark himself, writing himself into the story. 2. Lazarus, the disciple who had been raised. 3. John, the beloved disciple who is never directly named. But there's a fourth possibility that unifies all the previous ones. They were the same person. Let me explain. The multiple identity theory, Dr. James Tabor, professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, proposes something revolutionary. In the ancient world, especially in initiatory contexts, it was common for people to adopt new names after transformative experiences. The young man in Gethsemane could have been known by different names in different Christian communities. Think of it this way. Lazarus was his birth name. The beloved disciple was his initiatory title. The young man was his ritual description. John Mark might have been his full name. Acts 12:12 mentions John, also called Mark, confirming that multiple names were normal. The devastating comparative analysis. Observe these disturbing parallels. The young man in Gethsemane, Mark 14:51-52, dressed in linen sheet over naked body, follows Jesus closely. Present at the moment of arrest, flees when they try to capture him, the beloved disciple, John 13:21, reclining on Jesus' chest at the Last Supper, present at the crucifixion, only male disciple, first disciple to arrive at the empty tomb, recognizes the risen Jesus before Peter, the young man in the tomb. Mark 16:5, dressed in white, sitting inside the tomb, announces the resurrection, knows exactly what happened. 3 different people? Or the same person at 3 different moments of his spiritual transformation? The secret gospel of Mark evidence. Remember the censored passage quoted by Clement of Alexandria. The young man came to him wearing a linen sheet over his naked body, and he remained with him that night, for Jesus taught him the mystery of the kingdom of God. This happened after Jesus raised this young man, so the complete sequence would be 1. Jesus performs a profound spiritual transformation, Lazarus' resurrection. 2. The young man receives secret nighttime teachings, secret gospel. 3. The young man is present in Gethsemane as an initiate, Mark 14. 4. The young man announces the resurrection in the tomb, Mark 16. 5. The young man becomes the author who preserves all this, the Gospel of Mark. Why do 3 Gospels hide it and 1 reveal it? Mark, Matthew, and Luke, the synoptic Gospels, were written for broader audiences. They couldn't reveal identities that would endanger lives, but John, written decades later when persecution was different, could be more explicit. Although even John hides the real name of the beloved disciple, he never directly says, "I, John, was there." It's always the disciple whom Jesus loved. Identity protection until the end. The author's signature. Here's the detail that reveals everything. Only Mark mentions the naked young man. Why? Because Mark was signing his work. He was saying, "I was there. I saw this. I am an eyewitness." But since there was still danger, he did it in coded form, in a way that only initiates would understand. Dr. Elaine Pagels explains it this way. The Gospels are not neutral reports. They are coded testimonies written by and for specific communities. Every strange detail is intentional. It's a signal for those who know how to read between the lines. So who was he? The most probable answer, based on all the evidence. The naked young man in Gethsemane was John Mark, the same author of the Gospel, who was also known as the beloved disciple and possibly identified with Lazarus in different traditions. He was someone who experienced profound spiritual transformation under Jesus' direct guidance, participated in secret nighttime initiatory ceremonies, was present at the crucial events of that final week, survived to bear witness to everything, concealed his identity for personal safety, and to protect the sacred teachings, left exactly 2 verses as his encrypted signature in the canonical text, "Where are you discovering these truths from?" I'm deeply moved to see how spiritual awakening has no borders or barriers. Leave your location in the comments. Let's form an international network of illuminated seekers. What the Church Fathers knew. What you're about to read is information rarely taught in seminaries or churches. Because it exposes an uncomfortable truth, early church leaders knew exactly what the naked young man in Gethsemane meant, and they left written clues. Clues that were conveniently forgotten when Christianity was institutionalized. The systematic campaign to erase mystical Christianity wasn't accidental. It was calculated, methodical, ruthless, and yet fragments survived, enough to reconstruct what was lost, enough to understand what Jesus really taught. Expanded understanding of the 2-tier system. Early Christianity didn't just have 2 levels of teaching, it had 2 completely different operating systems. Level 1, Esoteric Christianity for the masses. Focus on moral behavior and obedience, emphasis on faith in historical events, crucifixion, resurrection, salvation through belief in Jesus as Savior, external rituals, communion, baptism as public ceremonies, hierarchical church structure, written scriptures as final authority. Level 2, Esoteric Christianity for initiates. Focus on inner transformation and direct experience, emphasis on mystical union with the divine. Salvation through gnosis, direct spiritual knowledge, internal practices, meditation, contemplation, sacred ceremonies, horizontal community of seekers. Living transmission from teacher to student. Jesus himself encoded this 2-tier system throughout his teachings. He constantly said, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Why would he say that if everyone could understand his message equally? Because the parables had 2 meanings, one for the crowd, one for the disciples. Matthew 13:10-11 makes this explicit. Then the disciples came and said to him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" And he answered them, "To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given." Secrets of the kingdom, given to some, withheld from others. This isn't elitism. It's recognition that spiritual readiness varies. Not everyone is prepared for the deepest teachings. And forcing advanced knowledge on unprepared minds can cause harm. The transformation process. The initiatory path that the young man in Gethsemane underwent wasn't a one-time event. It was a process, a journey of progressive revelation. Stage 1, the call. Something awakens in you, a dissatisfaction with surface-level religion, a hunger for something deeper, a recognition that there must be more. Stage 2, purification, ritual cleansing, both physical and spiritual, fasting, prayer, meditation, confronting your shadow, dying to the old identity. This is where the nakedness in Gethsemane fits, the stripping away of everything false. Stage 3, illumination, direct spiritual experience, mystical visions, revelations. The secrets of the kingdom are unveiled. This is what happened in that nighttime ceremony with Jesus. Stage 4, union, complete identification with the divine. The realization that I and the Father are one applies to you too. Not blasphemy, not ego, truth. This is the ultimate gnosis. Stage 5, return, coming back to serve others. Like the young man announcing the resurrection, like Mark writing the gospel, bearing witness, leaving clues, guiding others on the path. The young man in Gethsemane had completed these stages. That's why he was there, that's why he was naked, that's why he fled when threatened, and that's why he returned to announce the resurrection. He had become what he witnessed. What this means for your journey. You don't need to go to Gethsemane, you don't need a physical teacher, you don't need to join a secret society. The path is available right now, right where you are. The Dead Sea Scrolls can be read online. The Nag Hammadi library is fully translated. The writings of the Church Fathers are accessible. You can begin your own initiation today, through study, through practice, through sincere seeking. The only requirement is genuine desire for truth, not comfort, not certainty, truth. Are you ready? The living tradition. Here's something most people don't realize. The mystical Christianity that Jesus taught never completely died. It went underground. It survived in desert monastics who practiced contemplative prayer, medieval mystics like Meister Eckhart and Hildegard of Bingen, Eastern Orthodox hesychasm with its focus on inner transformation, Christian Kabbalah and its esoteric interpretations, Gnostic communities that preserved alternative texts, individual seekers across centuries who found the inner path. These weren't heretics, they were the true inheritors of Jesus' deepest teachings. And today, that stream is re-emerging. The censored texts are available, the practices are being recovered. The direct path to divine experience is accessible again. This is what the young man in Gethsemane represents: the possibility of transformation, the reality of gnosis, the promise that you too can know, not believe. Know. Final integration. Everything we've explored points to one inescapable conclusion. The naked young man in Gethsemane was not a random detail. He was a deliberate encoding of Christianity's mystical dimension, a dimension that included secret teachings beyond the public parables, initiatory ceremonies of death and rebirth, direct transmission of spiritual knowledge, progressive revelation based on readiness, inner transformation as the path to salvation. This wasn't added to Christianity. Later. This was original Christianity. What came later was the edited version, the controlled version, the institutional version. But the original remains, hidden in plain sight, in 2 verses that survived 2,000 years of censorship, waiting for those with eyes to see. The choice before you. You now stand at the same threshold the young man stood at in Gethsemane. Will you undergo the transformation? Will you shed the old garments of limited understanding? Will you risk everything for direct knowledge of truth? Or will you return to the comfort of the familiar? The choice is yours. But know this: once you've seen the pattern, you can't unsee it. Once you've glimpsed the deeper reality, you can't forget it. The young man's story survived for a reason, and that reason is you. Right now, at this exact moment, reading these words, feeling something stir in your soul, recognizing that you're being called to something greater. The initiation has already begun. The only question is, will you complete it? Make sure to subscribe and activate the notification bell to stay informed of each revelation. The next video will continue where this one left off. And believe me, what's coming will leave you speechless. If the fire for truth burns intensely within you, consider the membership. That's where we truly break all boundaries. Thank you for your time and courage. We'll meet again in the next awakening.